There are moments that arrive without announcement. They don't ask for your attention. They simply settle into the background of ordinary days until you can no longer remember what the background looked like before them. I spent years believing transformation was always visible, that it arrived through difficult conversations, through painful endings, through decisions that demanded everything from you at once. I believed you could always locate the exact moment and say, asterisk there, that was where things became different. I know better now. Some changes don't begin with an event. They begin with a presence. Not the kind that fills a room. The kind that quietly rearranges the furniture inside your thoughts until nothing sits where it once did. I didn't notice it happening. Why would I? My routine remained the same. My habits stayed untouched. From the outside, nothing had shifted. But the outside has never been where the real story lives. The real story lives underneath. Beneath language. Beneath emotion. Beneath the explanations we reach for simply because silence makes us uncomfortable. That's where change actually begins, not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly enough that you can't return to the person you were before you noticed it. People tend to believe understanding begins with answers. I've come to think it begins with better questions. Not questions about who someone is or where they're going. Questions about why certain people feel familiar before they've earned the right to. Why some conversations feel unfinished after hours of speaking, while others feel complete after almost nothing at all. Why one person's existence can quietly become part of your internal landscape without ever asking permission. These aren't romantic questions. They reach somewhere deeper than romance. Romance depends on expectation. What I'm describing survives without expectation, without promises, without definitions. That's precisely what makes it difficult to explain. I tried calling it coincidence. That explanation dissolved quickly. I tried calling it curiosity. Curiosity eventually fades. This didn't. I tried convincing myself it was simply familiarity produced by repeated exposure. But repetition alone doesn't create recognition. I've repeated conversations with hundreds of people across my life. Most disappeared from memory before the week had ended. A few remained because circumstances required it. Very few remained because something about their presence quietly attached itself to the way I understood everything else. Those people become landmarks. Not because they are louder than others. Because they become reference points. Everything begins organizing itself in relation to them. I never intended for anyone to become one of mine. I've always preferred the slight distance. Watching before participating. Listening before responding. Distance creates perspective. Perspective creates accuracy. Accuracy creates something that resembles safety. At least, that's what I told myself. When you remain just far enough from things, very little reaches you deeply enough to leave permanent marks. You become difficult to misread because very little is ever fully exposed. Most people meet a carefully measured version of you. Not dishonest. Simply translated. The original stays somewhere protected, somewhere untouched, somewhere no one has been given directions to. For years I called that wisdom. Perhaps it was. Or perhaps it was simply fear that had learned to dress itself in the language of discipline. It's remarkable how long we can mistake our defenses for our personality. Eventually they become inseparable. You begin introducing yourself through the walls you've constructed. You stop remembering what existed before them. I didn't realize that it happened to me until something small occurred. Nothing dramatic. Nothing anyone else would have marked as significant. Not a confession. Not a turning point. Not even a complete thought. A pause. A silence that somehow contained more than most conversations I had ever participated in. Most silence feels empty. People rush to escape it. They reach for the next sentence before the previous one has finished settling. Words become distractions from the discomfort of simply existing alongside another person without performing. I've understood that for most of my life. I've watched people fill quiet moments with meaningless sound because they believed the absence of speech meant the absence of connection. I've never agreed. Some silences carry more truth than explanations ever could. Some pauses contain enough honesty to replace entire conversations. That was the first thing I noticed. Not what was said. What wasn't. For the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel responsible for carrying the moment forward. I didn't feel the familiar pressure to translate myself into something easier. I didn't feel the quiet need to simplify complicated thoughts so they could fit inside ordinary language. The moment was simply allowed to exist. That sounds like a small thing. It wasn't. Because people rarely understand how exhausting constant translation becomes. Imagine spending your entire life converting what you genuinely think into smaller, safer pieces. Imagine editing every sentence before it leaves your mouth. Imagine anticipating misunderstandings before they arrive and quietly adjusting yourself to prevent them. Eventually, you stop noticing you're doing it. It becomes automatic. You no longer speak naturally. You speak carefully, not to deceive, simply to survive. When that habit disappears, even briefly, the difference is immediate. Almost unsettling. Not because freedom feels strange. Because you had forgotten how heavy the restraint had become. That's what happened. Nothing more, and somehow nothing less. Everything that followed felt slightly recalibrated. Not transformed. Recalibrated. Like an instrument tuned so gradually that the musician only notices once the music begins sounding clearer than before. Clarity is an unusual thing. People assume they want it until it arrives. Then they discover that clarity removes every excuse. Confusion allows postponement. Uncertainty allows avoidance. Clarity quietly asks for honesty. And honesty, almost always, asks for courage. I wasn't certain I had that courage. Not because the truth frightened me. Because acknowledging certain things felt irreversible. There are realizations you cannot unknow once they've become visible. They're like doors that vanish behind you the moment you step through them. No dramatic sound. No announcement. Just the quiet understanding that the landscape has permanently changed and will not be changing back. I began noticing myself differently. Not becoming someone new. Becoming more visible to myself. Those are separate experiences. Changing suggests replacement. Discovery suggests illumination. Perhaps we've always been entirely ourselves. Perhaps life simply determines how much of that self becomes lit. If that's true, then certain people don't change us. They reveal rooms inside us we've never entered. Rooms that existed long before anyone arrived, quiet and dust-covered, waiting patiently beneath years of accumulated habit. The strange part is those rooms don't always contain answers. Sometimes they contain only better questions. Questions you've been unknowingly avoiding for years. Questions that don't accuse or demand. Questions that simply remain present until you're finally willing to face them honestly. I've encountered many intelligent people in my life. Many kind ones. Many who understood my words well enough. Very few ever seemed interested in understanding the silence surrounding those words. There is always context beneath expression. Always another layer beneath the obvious one. Most conversations end where language stops. The meaningful ones begin there. That's what I've been learning to pay attention to. Not the other person. Not even myself. The space that appears between two minds when neither feels obligated to perform. That space is rare. Not because honesty is rare. Because sustained attention is. Most people listen just long enough to prepare their response. Few remain present long enough for another person's thoughts to finish unfolding at their own pace. Genuine presence cannot be imitated. It either exists or it doesn't. And once you've experienced it, every performance of it becomes instantly transparent. Not disappointing. Simply visible. Perhaps that's why certain encounters refuse to fade. Not because they overwhelmed us. Because they quietly became part of how we interpret everything that follows. I don't know where this leads. For the first time, I've stopped trying to map the destination before arriving. I'm paying attention to the direction instead. Maybe that's enough. Maybe certainty was never the point. Maybe understanding isn't something we reach. Maybe it's something we continue becoming, one quiet realization at a time, until the person looking back from our own reflection feels slightly less like a stranger than they did yesterday. And perhaps that slow, patient process of becoming less strange to ourselves is the only journey that was ever truly worth taking.